on Ask the Rabbi with our lovely Rabbi Levi Friedman from the Chabad of Coconut Grove. How are you?
I'm good, thank God. How are you doing, Susan?
Fabulous, thank you. Again, we meet on Tuesday.
Thank goodness for the show. We get to meet in person. That's great.
I know. Thank you. I don't like Zoom, you know.
Yes.
Today, we are going to talk about Orthodox Jewish weddings. And I know that I've been to more than a few.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that some of our people who watch this video have been there, and I think they've been shell-shocked. They don't know what to expect. So anybody in the future who's going to be invited to an Orthodox Jewish wedding, I encourage you to go. It's a blast. It's huge. We just have a really good time. So Rabbi, let's talk about first things first. I know that behind the scenes, there's the first people are married before they go down the aisle. They sign a ketubah, right? The bride and groom. Could you explain very quickly and briefly about that ceremony that people normally don't see?
Okay, so it's like a funny place to start, but sure. You're actually not married before you go down the aisle. We sign the ketubah. The ketubah is a marriage contract, essentially, and it pretty much represents sort of the legal, practical aspects of a marriage. So a couple that's getting married, presumably they're very in love and very idealistic, and think everything's going to be wonderful.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to overlook the details and the nitty-gritty. So when you get married, you enter into a relationship. There is a certain vulnerability that comes along with it, and therefore a responsibility. In the traditional Jewish marriage contract, the ketubah, it's really about the husband's responsibility towards his wife.
Oh,
so
very
to
nice.
provide for
That's
her, to
nice
take
to
care
hear.
of her, and so on. So it's kind of a one-sided document where
So what does it say? What is the husband responsible for?
the husband's responsible to feed her, to care for her, to take care of her emotional needs, her physical needs, all of those things. It addresses what happens if the marriage were to end in some way, either by divorce or with the death of the husband, and the wife's right to his estate and to his assets. So there's so that the woman is not left vulnerable in the marriage, because in a sense there's probably a certain amount of vulnerability that the woman opens herself up to that the man doesn't really experience in the marriage, where certainly if there are children involved, and she becomes, let's say, the primary carer for the children, and that's so there are all these things that the husband has to be accountable for his wife. So that's the marriage contract. Now, the marriage contract is not what consummates the marriage. The marriage contract is a legal document that is binding. Well, obviously, once it's signed and it's accepted, it's binding. But in the event that they get married, right? So they still have to go through the marriage ceremony and rite in order for that to actually be binding.
So let's talk about the marriage ceremony, which everybody sees. You've got it's quite different than a regular marriage that we see, secular marriage, as where the huppah, or the place where they go underneath, is very crowded with a lot of people.
Well, so the truth is, I mean, there are so many different customs and different traditions in different Jewish communities. The most stark difference would be, let's say, between, to generalize, would be between a Sephardic and an Ashkenazic wedding. Sephardic would be Jews that are more, the Mediterranean, the Middle East, whereas the Ashkenazi Jews are the European Jewish communities. And those two communities, over the centuries, developed really distinct sort of practices and customs. So the nuts and bolts of it are basically the same. The ceremony is the main components of it are the same, but there are slight subtle differences, and more sort of superficial differences that one might, that at least are that are more visible, but are really secondary elements of the ceremony. But the actual ceremony itself and the main components of it are exactly the same, just with a slightly different accent, essentially.
So with a huppah, let's just very quickly, the Talis is used. Is it the groom's Talis used for the huppah?
So first of all, what is a huppah before we get into that, right? So I was going to say that so within even Orthodox traditional Jewish weddings, you're going to find variances and differences. So I can speak from my experience. I've experienced, various types of weddings, but but I don't know if we'll cover all of them in detail. But let's talk about the main components. So you're talking about the chuppah. The chuppah is the canopy under which the bride and groom stand at the time of their marriage. And the canopy is it's a canopy standing on 4 poles. They're generally decorated really nicely. It looks great in the pictures. And that's where the wedding ceremony actually takes place, under a canopy. That's the wedding canopy. The reason for that is because, well, there are a number of reasons, but one of the reasons for it is because we reminisce it's reminiscent of the tent of Abraham and Sarah, the first Jewish couple who had a tent which was open from all 4 sides. And that's because their primary occupation in life was to invite people in, to educate people, to share their ideas and philosophy, their faith with the masses. And so wherever they went, they set up shop, and their doors were always open to anybody from all walks of life that were welcomed in. So symbolically, their tent was sort of open from all 4 sides, meaning whichever direction you were coming from, whichever direction you were headed to in life, there was a place for you at their table, and you were invited and welcome. And similarly, when we start a Jewish home, there's a certain amount of insularity that needs to take place, and actually some of that is addressed also even in the huppah ceremony, interestingly. But when we talk about the home that you're going to build, the marriage canopy is reminiscent of their home that we want open from all sides, so that it's a place where people can come to be inspired. It's a place from which itself generates warmth and light to the outside world in all directions. So that's the marriage canopy, and everything takes place under the canopy.
And then the Talis.
The Talis
the top
is
of
not
the
right.
huppah?
So
Is that more custom?
Yeah.
Or?
So the Talis
okay.
is really more personal preference kind of thing.
Okay.
That's not, the huppah does not have to be made of anybody's Talis. Talis would be the large prayer shawl that's worn during prayer. No, that's people like to use it. It just looks very Jewish, I suppose. I'm not sure exactly how that came about. I've some of my relatives. One of my uncles passed away fairly young, and left some children that were yet to be married. And so he didn't merit to walk some of his kids down the aisle. And at their weddings, that was the first time, it's for me growing up, I'd never seen a talis as a part of a chuppah. And at their weddings, at his children's weddings, they would drape his talis over the chuppah, because we're told that to a wedding, the souls of the departed, parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, up to 3 generations, and sometimes even more, come from heaven to participate at the wedding and to bless the bride and groom. And so while that's certainly a concept that's felt by the family that's experiencing the wedding, but the talis, seeing my uncle's talis on top of his children's huppah sends chills down your spine, and it just really brings that idea home. So that's where I'd seen it the first time, and since then I've come to see people using it just I maybe because it looks, I don't know why people are using the talis, but that's
Yeah. So I know that the bride and groom fast before their wedding. They go to the mikvah the day of or the night before their wedding. And these are just, we're quickly going through stuff. So people have background.
I don't know what you're talking about. All of these details. These are all need their own shows.
So I'm giving you some information.
There's the chuppah, there's the mikvah, there's the show. Let's have some matzah. I don't know. Let's just go through Jewish concepts, and then we'll light the menorah. Okay. So.
Well, we only have like 15 minutes left.
Well, I don't know that you should expect to see the mikvah at the wedding. It's not
but I'm just giving some background information. I do know that during the ceremony, people walk around 7 times around the bride and groom. What's that about?
Right. So also that's different customs. But one of the customs is that the bride walks around the groom 7 times under the chuppah. So
the bride does.
The bride walks around the groom, and the reason is it sort of sets up a fence, a barrier. I just mentioned the idea of the chuppah, the wedding canopy itself being open in all 4 sides. But there's open, and then there's opening yourself up to others in a way that would be inappropriate. So the bride, who's the anchor, the woman who's the anchor of the home, she sets up the boundaries of the home. And so she comes into that open space and she walks around the room 7 times, which in a sense creates a barrier around them into which she will step and enter into that space that is the space that's sacred, that's just for husband and wife, for nobody else to penetrate.
Oh, that's wonderful. I didn't know that.
And if you want to hear the flip side of it, that represents almost the exact opposite as well, which is that it recalls when the Jewish people were entering the land of Israel and they approached Jericho, and Jericho was surrounded by a big wall, and the Jewish people walked around, right? The Israelites walk around. Joshua leads the people around Jericho 7 times, and the walls come crashing down. So this idea of walking 7 times around the room also represents while it represents building a barrier that to isolate them, right, in a sense, to protect them from the outside world. On the other hand, it's also about tearing down the barrier between husband and wife, right? So that by the time they're standing united together, about to get married, there are no barriers between them.
Interesting. I also heard it's like the 7 days of creation as well.
It's also, yeah, absolutely.
A lot of representing the number 7.
Right. So yes, 7 days. And also she goes in a circle, right? The circle represents infinity, right?
Oh.
There's no beginning, there's no end. So the bride circles the groom, and the groom circles the bride by putting the ring on her finger. Right, which is another uniquely Jewish.
I noticed that married men don't have.
Right. So there are some that wear rings later, but at the marriage ceremony, the only one who gets a ring is the bride.
Okay.
The groom puts the ring on the bride. There's no double ring ceremony.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Something else. There are lots of blessings and. Lots of blessings, and
you can never have enough, can you?
No. Everybody gets a place.
Everybody gets a blessing.
Everybody gets a blessing.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what else is very distinctive about a wedding versus a secular wedding, a Jewish wedding. You have several rabbis up there also.
Well, how many people does it take to get married? Right? How many people? 3, 4. Right. So really, you need 4 people to get married. You need a bride and a groom, and you need 2 witnesses to witness the act of marriage. The rabbi is just there to collect the paycheck. No, so the rabbi, obviously, you need somebody who knows what they're doing up there, obviously. But as far as the integral parts of the wedding, it's really 4 people. It's the bridegroom and 2 people, because, if a couple gets married in the forest and there's nobody there to see it, did they get married?
Did they get married?
That's the famous question. We're all familiar with that question. So you need 2 witnesses. Those are the most important people at the wedding. The most important, the only real active players in the marriage. What was your question?
Well, okay, so we're moving very quickly. Breaking of the glass. What does that represent at the end?
The breaking of the glass. The breaking of the glass is because at the height of our joy, we always are called upon to remember Jerusalem, right? Calling the verse in Psalms, if I were to forget you, O Jerusalem, so let my right hand lose its dexterity, and so on. So at the height of our joy, we're always reminded. It's always sort of measured and tempered by the fact that we're in exile, the fact that Jerusalem is destroyed, the fact that we don't live in a redeemed world of perfection yet. And so that's always something that measures sort of that, or limits that joy, to always recall that, and even at the height of our joy, to be mindful of it and to make sure that we're working towards rebuilding the world, right?
Right.
So not to think that you get married, you've started your new life, everything is perfect, and that's it. Now we can just focus on each other. No, we have to remember that we live in a fractured world, a shattered world, and that now as a couple, that's another light in the world. It brings more peace into the world, and we need to not stop at the wedding ceremony, but to live our lives in that way as well.
Okay, and something else that I noticed: the bride and groom go off in a room together. They have their first meal alone together. I don't know if this is like stepping over boundaries here, but there's somebody watching, to make sure nobody enters into the room, and they have their first real moment together, intimate moment, just their first meal. Is there anything that covers it, right?
Yeah, I don't even know what you're talking about.
You're getting me into trouble here. I know that exists.
Well, it doesn't exist in all communities, by the way. It's not part of some of the traditions for some, but the right after the marriage ceremony, right after the huppah, right where the marriage ceremony takes place, there is a moment that the bride and groom go off on their own to be alone, and like you said, have their first intimate moment together as husband and wife. So
let me ask you something. Why is there separation between men and women?
Wow,
people always have an issue with that.
That's perfect segue, isn't there? Where do we get there? But before let's back it up maybe first.
And I bring that up because a lot of people really don't like it when they go there. They're separated from their spouse.
Oh, you're talking about now the reception. You've moved on from the wedding, so there's so many more things to cover.
Sorry. Yes, there is. There's a lot.
So I think people are going to watch the show. They're really going to not be prepared to go to an Orthodox Jewish wedding. I think that's the overall message. The goal was to know what to expect, and now really just you're
There's
more
so
confused.
much to cover.
Just go there and be more confused. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So the separation you're talking about is at the reception. Men and women dance separately. We don't dance together, and it's because the laws of modesty are very important in Jewish tradition. And when we celebrate, we want to be able to celebrate purely for the bride and groom, be there for them, to rejoice with them, and to make them happy. And the mixed dancing becomes what it has the potential to be, could be. And maybe you can even say what it should be is when you're focused on the person you're dancing with rather than on the bride and groom. So those laws of modesty are always in place, and especially when people are happy. And when you're happy, you're a little bit more loose and you're a little bit more open. So it's especially at times like those that we need to be more careful.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah. Now people might be a little put off by it at times, and it certainly makes sense if you're not used to that kind of tradition. But as you can attest, I think they're a lot of fun, those weddings, aren't they?
I got to be honest with you. When you're separated from your husband, it's it goes crazy.
So you're saying you're validating what I just said?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
It sounds counterintuitive in a way, but it's...
yeah. When you're in the moment and you don't have to worry about, is my husband happy? The whole thing, you are just going for it. And I love it. I love Jewish weddings. I noticed that a lot of yeshiva boys end up in Jewish weddings. They bring yeshiva boys to feed them, and it just
got
becomes
a lot of energy to release.
A lot of energy. It's great. Is there any? How much time do we have, Tommy? Oh, okay. So continue on something that you'd like to bring up about a Jewish wedding.
So the entire wedding ceremony is. Obviously everything in Judaism, I mean, some of that's become apparent in some of our conversations here. Everything has meaning attached to it. There's nothing that is superficial, and there's nothing that is just done for the cameras. Everything has depth and meaning. And the wedding ceremony itself also is designed, if you pay close attention, it's reminiscent of the first Jewish wedding. So we mentioned the first Jewish couple, Abraham and Sarah, right? And then there's the first Jewish wedding that's recorded in the Bible, which would be between Isaac and Rebekah. But then there's the sort of the cosmic wedding, which is between God and the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. And we borrow elements from all of these weddings, right? So we talked about the home of Abraham and Sarah. That's the type of home we want to build. And so we have our huppah, our wedding canopy is open on all four sides. The bride puts a veil on before her face is veiled during the wedding ceremony, and that's reminiscent of Rebecca, who had a veil. But when she met her husband Isaac for the first time, she covered herself with a veil. The seven blessings, you mentioned there are a lot of blessings. The seven blessings, and there's 7 days of celebration. That's reminiscent to the marriage of Jacob with Leah, Jacob with Rachel. We learn a lot about the wedding celebration from them.
Oh, back to the covering of the veil, if you don't mind. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Before the bride and the groom get married, the veil is lifted. So the correct me, am I wrong? That the groom can see who he's really marrying, or no?
Well, he sees her before he puts the veil on her face, right? And the
veil you're right. You're right.
Could be
you're right.
See-through. It doesn't. It doesn't.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Continue. Yes.
So, yeah, but you're referencing something else, which is in many communities, there's a tradition that the bride and groom don't see each other for a week before the wedding.
Yes, that is correct.
So the first time, imagine you're getting married to somebody, and the first time obviously you're together, you're in a relationship for a long time, however long your engagement period lasts as well. But then the week before the wedding, there's no direct contact.
Correct.
And so some communities have that tradition. And then the first time you'll see your bride or your groom first time in a week is actually at your wedding. So that's quite a powerful moment. Imagine that first moment. Imagine the feeling that it evokes, and that those are feelings that you take straight from that moment right into the marriage ceremony, which is quite powerful. So the at the huppah, right at the wedding ceremony, you've got the parents of the bride and groom that escort them, which is reminiscent to the escorts of the Jewish people and God at Mount Sinai. Aaron sort of bringing the people closer to Mount Sinai, and Moses sort of bringing God down from Mount Sinai. We know that at Mount Sinai, there was fire. The mountain was on fire, it says. Well, the parents carry torches or candles. There's fire that plays a role as well. So even the wedding canopy itself is also reminiscent of Mount Sinai, where God held the mountain over the Jewish people's head, the sages tell us. And that's read into a verse where it says that the people stood at the foot of the mountain, but a literal reading of that verse is that they stood under the mountain.
Correct.
Right? So as if they were sort of under this canopy together with God. So all of these elements come together, and they represent the importance, the central role that marriage plays in Jewish life, right? So marriage is not just something, it's not just a convenience, it's not just for tax credits, tax breaks, and it's not just a social construct. Marriage is a divine institution. It's an institution that was invented by God, and one that we look at as an ideal in life, so that we don't live for ourselves, but we live for somebody else, right? To be alone is not okay, right? In the beginning of Genesis, it says, God says that it's not good for man to be alone. I'm going to give him a partner, right? Latov hayot adam levado. It's not good for man to be alone, because to live for yourself, just to live for me, that's not a good life. A good life is one that's shared with somebody else. And so marriage is sort of that ideal, and the perfect, while we're always sharing and giving with others, but marriage is a much more intimate union, bond, a sacred bond that really sort of presents an opportunity for these values to really flourish and to grow. And ultimately, if we're focused on building homes and families where we're united as a unit, where we share our values, even just with our children, and raise them with morality and goodness, and recognizing that there's a higher purpose, right? That there's a God and there's a higher purpose, then that ultimately changes the world and makes this world a divine place. So we stand under the chuppah, just a young couple, maybe sort of romantically and hopelessly in love with each other and focused on each other, and yet the doors are open, because we want to take that and have that emanate and spread out to the whole world.
That's so romantic. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you very much. And you have a class tonight?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
A class about death, dying.
We go from marriage to dying. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the end of life, afterlife, mourning, heaven, hell, all that good stuff. We're starting a new course, so that should be very exciting.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next week on Ask the Rabbi. Thank you.